The Mafia boss invited his maid to a gala. She stole the spotlight, and he couldn't take his eyes off her. A true real-life story. Part 1. Nobody in the Conti household ever really looked at Elena. Not properly. She was just there, early in the morning, before anyone else was awake, moving quietly through the hallways with a mop and a bucket, making sure every marble floor shone like glass before Mr. Conti came downstairs for his coffee. She was background, furniture, part of the house, like the tapestries on the wall or the bronze handles on the doors. That was how she liked it. Elena had been working at the Conti estate for 8 months. She was 27, originally from Naples, and she sent most of her salary back home every single month. Her mother had bad knees and couldn't work. Her younger brother was still in school. The job paid well, the estate was large enough that she rarely had to interact with anyone directly, and the rules were simple. Do the work, stay invisible, don't ask questions. She had learned very early in life that the less space you took up in a rich man's world, the safer you were. Mr. Dante Conti, her employer, was not the kind of man anyone described casually. He was 38, the head of one of the most powerful families in northern Italy, and the type of person who walked into a room and made it go quiet. Not because he was loud, but because something in the air shifted when he entered. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, at least not in ways you could quote later. He simply made you feel, very clearly, that everything in his vicinity happened because he allowed it to. Elena had seen grown men flinch when he looked at them. She never had. She wasn't sure if that was courage or just the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from not having the energy to be afraid anymore. She had noticed, in the way you notice things when you work quietly in the background, that he watched her sometimes. Not in any uncomfortable way. More like she was a puzzle he hadn't decided to solve yet. She didn't think much of it. The trouble, if you could call it that, started 3 days before the annual Conti Charity Gala. The gala was a big deal, not just in the estate, but in all of Milan. It happened every year at a hotel near the lake, and the guest list included people whose names you recognized from the news. Politicians, businessmen, old money families, the kind of people who never stood in lines. The staff had been preparing for weeks. Extra cleaning, extra polishing, extra everything. Then, 2 days before the event, Mr. Conti's personal assistant, a thin, nervous man named Ricci, who handled all his scheduling, slipped on the wet steps outside and fractured his wrist. He was taken to the hospital. He would not be back in time. Elena was in the middle of ironing a tablecloth in the laundry room when one of the senior staff came to find her. "Mr. Conti wants to see you." She set down the iron slowly. In 8 months, Dante Conti had never once asked to see her directly. She went to his study. He was standing by the window, looking out at the garden, his hands folded behind his back. He turned when she came in, looked at her for a moment, the way he always did, like he was reading something, and then said, very simply, "I need someone at the gala on Friday. You'll come with me as my aide for the evening." Elena blinked. "I clean your bathrooms, Mr. Conti." "Not this Friday," he said. That was the entire conversation. The next 2 days were strange. A stylist arrived at the house. Dresses were brought in. Someone measured Elena's height and shoulders, and left without explaining why. A security briefing was given to her. Who the important guests were, what topics to avoid, how to move through the room without causing disruptions. Elena absorbed all of it quietly. She didn't know why she was being chosen. She didn't ask. On the morning before the gala, she was taken to a room where 3 dresses had been laid out. One of them was a midnight blue gown, long, elegant, with a detailed collar that was clearly very expensive. She looked at it for a moment, then looked at the stylist. "The left seam on the collar is off," she said, "by about 4 millimeters. It's pulling the whole neckline slightly to one side." The stylist stared at her. "This dress costs more than most people's cars." "I know," Elena said. "The seam is still off." She didn't say it to be difficult. It was just true, and she had spent 3 years studying fashion design in Bogotá before her visa complications ended everything, before the money ran out, and the dream quietly collapsed, and she ended up on a plane back to Italy with a certificate nobody here cared about, and skills that had nowhere to go. What she didn't know was that Mr. Conti had been passing by in the hallway at that exact moment, that he had heard, and that he had said nothing, but filed it away, the way he filed everything, behind those careful, watchful eyes. The night of the gala arrived. The hotel was everything you'd imagine. Chandeliers that caught the light like 1,000 small suns. Waiters moving through the crowd with trays of champagne. The quiet roar of 100 conversations happening at once. Elena walked in beside Mr. Conti and kept her face neutral and her eyes moving, the way she had been told. She was not nervous. She had been invisible in rich people's spaces her whole life. This was just a larger, shinier version of that. Dante worked the room. He shook hands, exchanged words, smiled the way powerful men smile at events like these, with their mouths, not their eyes. Elena stayed nearby, kept track of who he spoke to, handed him the right name or detail when he needed it. She was good at it. She had always been good at paying attention. About an hour into the evening, she found herself near the champagne table, alone for a few minutes, while Mr. Conti stepped aside for a quiet conversation. That's when the Contessa approached. Contessa Lyra was one of those people whose reputation arrived before they did. She was in her 60s, dressed in all black, and she had a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were being scored. She was a tastemaker in Milan's social world, the kind of woman who had ended careers with a single comment at a dinner table. She came to stand beside Elena, looked her up and down and said, in a tone that was more test than conversation, "I don't believe we've met." "No," Elena said simply, "we haven't." "And who are you with?" "Mr. Conti." The Contessa raised an eyebrow, the smallest, most devastating expression of skepticism Elena had ever seen. Then she said, "That gown has a collar problem." Elena looked at her. 4 millimeters on the left seam. I noticed. Something shifted in the Contessa's face. She looked at Elena again, but differently this time. "You know fabric?" "A little," Elena said, which was her way of saying, more than you'd expect from someone holding a champagne glass at your charity gala. What followed was 40 minutes that neither of them planned. They started talking about the collar, then about Italian tailoring in the 1970s, and how the standards had slipped, then about Colombian textile traditions that most European designers had borrowed from without ever crediting, then about a tapestry Elena had noticed in the hotel lobby that she had quietly recognized as a reproduction of a reproduction, a fake of a fake, hanging on a wall where nobody who mattered had ever looked closely enough. The Contessa laughed, a real laugh, not a polite one, twice. By the time Elena noticed that a small group had gathered around them, a documentary filmmaker, a young gallery owner, a fabric designer from Florence, she wasn't sure how it had happened. She hadn't been performing. She hadn't been trying to impress anyone. She had just been talking. The way she talked when she forgot to be invisible. Across the room, Dante had stopped mid-sentence in a conversation with a senator. He was watching her. Not the way an employer watches an employee, not even the way a man watches a woman. It was something quieter than both of those things. He was watching the way you watch when you realize you have been wrong about something. Not badly wrong, not embarrassingly wrong, but wrong in the specific way of having looked at something every day and still not seen it. His second-in-command leaned in close and said, dry as always, "She's making more contacts than you are tonight." Dante said nothing. He was thinking about a seam that was 4 millimeters off, about Bogota, about the way Elena had told him about her fashion degree in the car. In 2 plain sentences, no drama, the way you mention a door that closed a long time ago. Later that evening, Dante stepped outside to take a phone call near the garden terrace. The night air was cool. Through the glass doors, he could still see the lights of the ballroom. He wasn't meant to hear the 2 men standing nearby, talking in the way that people talk when they think nobody is listening. "You see the Conti woman? Apparently she's his maid. He actually brought his maid." A short laugh. How embarrassing for him. Dante stood very still for a moment. He waited for the feeling, the sting of embarrassment, the instinct to explain, or defend, or correct. He had grown up in a world where image was everything, where one wrong perception could cost you more than money. The feeling didn't come. What came instead was something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. A kind of clarity, a recognition. Not of Elena. He had recognized her competence months ago, in the slow, accumulating way you recognize things you haven't named yet. What he recognized now was something about himself. That he was standing outside a gala, where a woman who cleaned his floors was holding a room full of people completely still, and the only thing he felt was something that was almost embarrassingly close to pride. He walked back inside. He crossed the entire ballroom. He came to stand beside her, and the small circle around her shifted naturally to include him, the way circles always did when he entered them. Elena glanced up at him with that look she always gave him, the assessing one, the one that didn't flinch. "You look like you're about to punish someone," she said quietly. "Perhaps," he said. And then, even more quietly, "You did well tonight." She studied his face for a second. "I think that's the first time you've said that to anyone." "Yes," he said. "Just that. No explanation." He offered his arm to walk her back to their table. She took it. The room noticed. The room always noticed everything in a place like that. Neither of them said anything about it. On the drive back to the estate, the city lights moved past the windows in long, slow streaks. Elena sat looking out at the lake, which was dark and flat and calm. "I know what I am in your world, Mr. Conti," she said eventually. Not bitterly, just plainly, the way she said most things. "Tonight doesn't change that." He looked at her profile in the passing light. "What are you then?" "An employee." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, perhaps, it was the same word he had used earlier. But it landed completely differently the second time. She heard it. She didn't respond, but she heard it. That night, at 2 in the morning, Dante sat alone in his study. The house was quiet. The gala was over. Everything was back to how it was supposed to be. He opened his laptop. He searched for a design school in Bogota, a small private institution that had closed down 6 years ago due to funding issues. He found an archived graduation list from the year before it shut down. He found her name, Elena Vasquez, fashion design, graduated with distinction. He stared at it for a long time. Distinction. She had graduated with distinction, and then a visa problem, and a family situation, and the quiet cruelty of timing had led her to a house in Milan where she ironed his tablecloths and buffed his floors and noticed 4mm seam errors that nobody else in a room full of wealthy people would ever see. He picked up his phone. It was late, but this was not the kind of call that waited for morning. The line rang twice. Ferrante. The voice on the other end was groggy, slightly annoyed. "It's Conti," Dante said. "I have someone I want you to meet. Properly this time. I'll explain when you're awake." He hung up. He sat in the quiet for another moment. Then he closed the laptop and turned off the light. Outside the window, the city went on doing what cities do. Moving, breathing, carrying all its people and their stories forward into the next morning. Elena, asleep in her small room on the far side of the estate, had no idea. She wouldn't, not yet. But something had already changed. Not loudly, not with any announcement, just quietly, the way the most real things always change, in the middle of a regular night, when nobody is looking, when it's too late to stop it, and too early to name it.